Hello students, this is Miss Wooten. Just letting you know this is me recording at home with strep throat, and my boyfriend is watching a football game in the background, so if there are any unnatural shouts wishing evil upon the New England Patriots, that is exactly what's happening. Sorry if any of you are Patriots fans. Today I've got, in lieu of me being there, and I really want to be there personally to talk to you about writing strategies. So hold on to the due date for your writing assignment for right now until tomorrow, and I'll tell you more about that tomorrow. But for today, I want to go ahead and start talking about instructional strategies because, first of all, I don't want to lose any more time on it. Second of all, this is really important. This was going to be homework regardless of whether I was here today or not. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. Instructional strategies. We've been talking about a lot of different things in Teacher Cadet. We've talked about the differences between learners. We've talked about the ways in which learners can be similar in a way too. We've talked about development stages that are pretty much going to be consistent throughout different age groups or different groups of people rather. And so now how do we bring all of that together? Now this is where this set of lessons is coming in. And I've got 3 of these PowerPoints that I'm going to be showing. The first one is going to be talking about what goes into a lesson plan, because you are eventually going to have to make lesson plans for your class lesson, and also when you do your field experience you're going to have to be writing lesson plans. So before we do that, let's just talk about how do you write a lesson plan in the first place? What goes into making a good lesson? And the first thing that we need to talk about is what information do you need to cover? And the first place that you go to find that is your standards. Now, you probably heard people talking about their standards, but you might not have any idea what that means. In most of your classes, your teachers are going along with a particular set of standards that dictate what has to be taught in that class. Sometimes it's given the order that it has to be covered in. Sometimes it's given the just a list of different topics. For instance, the Teacher Cadet program has its own set of standards for different things that I have to cover. For instance, I have to talk about instructional strategies as a standard. In my English classes that I teach, I have to go with the South Carolina College and Career Readiness Standards. And the standards, again, they're just a list of topics and skills that need to be covered in order for a student to really be competent in that subject area. When you go into your classrooms with your field experience teachers, they're going to have that information available for you. They're going to be able to tell you what standards need to be covered and how they need to be covered. And a lot of that is going to be determined by the curriculum. In Berkeley County School District, for almost all of our core classes, we actually have a written curriculum. What does that mean? Well, a curriculum is a set of things that has to be covered in a particular order. And it includes the standards, and it includes specific assignments and projects and things like that that need to be covered that help you teach the standards. So here's an example. For me, one of my standards that I have to talk about in English 4 is that I have to talk about tracing the development of theme. Whenever you read a novel or a short story or a poem, a lot of times you talk about the theme. So I have to have students read multiple different texts to look at what that theme might be, and then we look at the different elements of that poem or short story or whatever it is to find out where we can find that theme. Maybe if the theme is love overcoming hate and we're reading Romeo and Juliet, then we would look for examples in the story of how love overcomes hate. And then I might do something with that. So that's the standard, looking at theme. And the lesson plan is going to be how I'm going to cover that standard. So for my case, I'm having my students read something, and then I'm having them look for examples in the text and practice using that skill of finding and tracing the theme. And that's according to the curriculum that we use in Berkeley County as well. That's an assignment that pretty much every English 1 teacher is going to do. I don't teach Romeo and Juliet, but you get the idea. The other thing that you need to think about with thinking about what information you need to cover is you need to think about how much do your students already know. Some standards are covered in multiple different classes. For instance, the one I just talked about, theme, we talk about it in 9th grade, we're still talking about it in 12th grade. So I might not need to give my students the definition of theme in 12th grade, but I might need to give them more complicated texts from which they can practice their skill and hone it. However, I might have some students that have no idea what theme is. Maybe they were sleeping throughout most of 9th grade. I think I've probably had a lot of students that were sleeping throughout most of 9th grade. So when I give them that skill, I might need to go back and cover additional material beyond what I'm covering for most of my students, for those students that might need a little bit of extra teaching and reteaching. So that's what information do I need to cover, okay? Most of the time when you do your lesson plans, you're going to know what information you need to cover because somebody's going to tell you, okay? Easy. The next question is, how am I going to cover the material? This is the really tricky one because there are a whole bunch of different instructional styles that you can pick from. And most good teachers are going to kind of jump around from at least using a couple of these. They might not use all of these strategies, but they're going to use at least a couple of these strategies to make sure that students really understand what's going on. Now, the first one is lecture, and lecture is kind of what I'm doing right now. You've got some material that you have to cover, and so you talk about it. Lecturing is just talking. And a lot of people, when they think about lectures, and this is, by the way, one of your handouts where you have the different instructional styles, the advantages and disadvantages, this is where I want you to fill that handout out, okay? So for the first one, lecturing, one of the disadvantages of lecturing is that a lot of students automatically turn off their brains whenever the teacher starts talking. Now, is that the teacher's fault? Not necessarily. Sometimes it's the student's fault. Sometimes it is the teacher's fault. It just kind of depends on the situation. But students have this belief that whenever the teacher opens his or her mouth, whatever comes out is going to be boring. And that's not always true. Case in point, I have spent a lot of time in Teacher Cadet lecturing, and almost to a person, this class was engaged. So if you know from now on that lecture has engaged you in Teacher Cadet, now you know lecture can be an engaging style of lesson. Also, lecture, in my experience as a student and as a teacher, lecture is the easiest way to convey the greatest amount of material in a short period of time. If you have, if you think about some of the history teachers, the social studies teachers, their content is so big, they have so much that they have to cover, that they don't have time to do a lot of small group activities or individual projects. Now, they still do some of those things, but eventually, a lot of times, they just have to talk because they have to get a lot of material out to you at once. And so that's really a strong advantage to lecturing. And I also mentioned to you that your college professors, for the most part, are going to lecture. That does not mean they are going to bore you. Again, it just means that that is the style that is going to be preferred. Okay? The next strategy is groups. A lot of you really like groups, and a lot of you, I'm just guessing, probably really hate groups. And for some of you, it probably depends on who's in your group, right? Or what you're asked to do in your group. With group instruction, a lot of times what happens is that you will be given an assignment that you and your group mates will have to figure out together. And the advantage to that is that your group can help you out. If you are struggling with a concept, then you can get, if you have a good, strong group where everybody is, engaged and everybody's been following along to the best of their ability, then everyone can bring their knowledge to the table and you can turn out with a really great product. It's called cooperative learning, and it's really, really important to a lot of people nowadays. When they come into teachers' classrooms to observe, they want to see students engaged in cooperative learning. So that's the advantage, is that it can, when the group is a good group and when the assignment is a good assignment, groups can facilitate coming together and sharing knowledge and ideas. Of course, the disadvantage to groups is that if you have a group that is a lot of times in mixed company, where one person is doing a lot more of the work than others, then you develop a lot of feelings of resentment and frustration, and some group members might even be encouraged to be more lazy than they would have been otherwise, because they don't think that they have to have any kind of individual accountability. So that's groups. The next one I want to talk about is Socratic seminar, or questioning, different questioning styles. Socratic seminar is the most common form of this. Questioning instructional style is like this. I ask a question that relates to the content, and the class engages in a discussion in answering that question. And the bright side of that is that a lot of times students end up generating their own questions in the process. I might have a question for them, but at the end of it, they will have asked a lot more questions to get deeper into the material that they're learning. They answer each other's questions, so similar to in group style, they're sharing knowledge, they are collaborating. That's one of the advantages to questioning, and the Socratic seminar is a really good example of that. What happens in most Socratic seminars is that someone, either the students or the teacher, will bring some questions to the table that need to be answered, and in a circle or in some kind of discussion format, students will answer the questions and they will debate with one another as to the proper answers to those questions. And the teacher isn't talking so much. The teacher is really more facilitating what's happening. All really good reasons to have Socratic seminars and to have questioning. The disadvantage to questioning is that sometimes if you have a weaker group of students, they can get derailed. And if students don't come prepared for the seminar or for the questioning session, then they will not really gain anything out of it. So it takes a lot of maturity and a lot of preparation on the part of the students to have a successful Socratic seminar. The next couple you're probably familiar with, technology-aided lessons. This is a technology-aided lesson. This is a PowerPoint, which I'm using Screen-O-Matic to record over. You can talk about Smartboard lessons, Edmodo. The great thing about technology is that your students more and more are going to be familiar with it. Every single person in this room, with maybe one or two exceptions, has a smartphone, is familiar with technology, and they like it. The disadvantage is that for those students that don't have access to it, or that are confused by how to use it, or God forbid if the technology malfunctions, then a lot of times you have to backtrack and make a whole new lesson, or you end up wasting a lesson because it's not accessible to everyone. Finally, games. Games are great. Now, I'm talking about, it could be review games like Jeopardy. It could be students have to create a game or play a game based on the content, and it's high energy. It's fantastic in that way. Students are definitely encouraged to participate more than really with any of the other styles when they play games. But the problem can sometimes be that because of that high energy, a lot of students do not take it seriously, and so if you're not really, really focused on that day, then you might spend more time disciplining students or reinforcing rules and procedures than you do actually covering content, which is the whole point of school. The whole point of school is to learn. It's not to play, right? Although, a good class is going to feel like fun most of the time, even if you are learning. So it's a really fine line that you have to walk. There are a couple more of these worksheets and textbooks. The last one I want to talk about is project-based learning. Project-based learning is where a student is independently driven to ask a question on his or her own and to answer that question using research, using interviews, using scientific investigation. These are your science projects, your essays, your portfolios that you're going to be having to do. So again, the advantage is they really, really demonstrate what an individual student has learned, or a group. These can be groups as well. But the disadvantage here is that it does take a lot of maturity and a lot of independence, and so students who have not mastered those skills yet a lot of times are going to fall short. All right, stay tuned for video number 2.